Let's spend time speaking about Holy Trinity, Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, and we ask for the gift of wisdom, and we ask St. Thomas Aquinas to pray for us. Okay, so we've covered the. Just tell me if you don't want me to go yet.
I'm just going to check.
Okay. I'll have to repeat it if I need to. We've covered the pre-Socratic philosophers, and we've covered Socrates. Okay, and that there's a natural logic that leads up to Plato now. Plato, he's repeating. Plato obviously is an immense figure in the history of philosophy and in the history of theology as well. He's very influential. And the way that I tend to view the history of thought is in terms of mountain ranges where you've got, I hope this is the right one. Yep. You've got these really massive figures across the history of philosophy, and then you've got your smaller ones and then smaller ones. But Plato's definitely one of the largest peaks. If you're taking a wider view, looking back, you've got Plato and Aristotle, you've got Aquinas and Augustine, and you've got Kant, really. I mean, there's others, but I'm just giving you a basic overview. So when we look at Plato, you have to remember he's fundamental. He's very important. Put your hand up if you did some of the reading this week. Yeah? Put your hand up if you did, in terms of this, at least the part that I asked you to do from the Meno. Yeah? Great. All right. Do you have any comments on what that was like? Was it hard to understand, or you wasn't sure what was going on? Or yeah, okay. Yeah, okay. So you prefer just to say this is what I believe, and yeah, yeah, okay, okay. That's fair enough. That's fair enough. And who else?
No, I sort of got the general drift, but I couldn't sort of repeat it.
Yeah. And that's what you're going to find is when you start to get into it's with any discipline. At the start, it's hard to know what's going on. I was trying to think of metaphors for this. You know those that came out in the late 80s, no, 90s, those 3D magic eyes? And you look at them and an image comes out, and it can take a while. And it's like with this, it's like you start looking at and there's just a lot of information, and it doesn't have any shape for you. But that's what teachers are here for, is to show you what are the important points, so that image can start to form, and there's like a relief that comes out. And it's the same with poetry and painting and music. Now, I'm quite interested in poetry, but I find it hard to read. I can't understand half of this stuff. And with classical music, it might take a long time to appreciate what it's all about. So, yeah, just be patient with it. And the more that you read it and listen to what Father Leninich and I are saying about what's important and the major points, it'll start to make more sense. I thought that I would focus to start with on... Gosh, that's not... Got another class going on. Like a university. Okay. Focus on how to read. What are we looking for when we're reading? And then I'll go on to some of the facts about Plato's life, major themes, his influences, and then we'll look at one of the dialogues called the Meno. Okay. So when you're reading a work like this, the first reading can be really quite confusing, and that's fine. And I want to repeat that to you. Don't feel frustrated or low in self-esteem or something like that. If it doesn't make much sense, just go with it. Whatever comes into your mind, just keep it, okay? So what we're looking for when we're reading, if you're going to analyze a text, is what's the overall structure? Is there an argument? And in the text, the dialogue called the Meno, there is actually a structure. You've got a main concern, which is, does anybody know what the main concern of the dialogue is?
I want to make definitions.
Definition, yeah, of virtue. Yeah, and there's a question to do with virtue, which is, yeah, okay, yeah. We're starting to get into the stuff I want to look at later, but what is virtue? And there's a question, can it be taught? So when you try to make sense of something that you're reading, start with, okay, what is the main problem, the main question? And this is it. And there's clues for that right at the start, okay? And as you're reading through, you want to be thinking, all right, how does this fit into that first question? And there's a bit of and then a substructure. We get into the theory of recollection, which is Plato's theory of how we know things. So this is to do with how we know. I'm just giving you a very basic overview. And then this sort of fits, this is like a sub-theme that fits into this overall theme. And sometimes you might be reading through the dialogue and thinking, where's he going with this? How does it fit in? But it's good to have in your mind a bit of a map of what's going on. So that can help you. Because when the mind is just presented with a series of facts, all presented as equally important, it's overwhelming and we can't make sense of it. So it's good to have in your mind the overall map. What's the direction of the argument? All right. So we want to look at the structure. We want to look at the main questions or problems. So when you do your reading in, next week and the week after and so forth, think about these two things. Don't worry if you haven't got it completely correct. Just have a go at it and write down what you think are the main questions and problems. It's really, and there's not much detail. This is no detail at all. It's just very basic overview. 3, what are the main claims? You don't want to put a long list of all the things that he's saying, just 2 or 3. If you had to summarize to someone, what is Plato saying in this, and you had 2 or 3 sentences, what would you say? Now, if you want to go into a bit more, a bit deeper, you would then say, all right, what influences can we see in terms of the themes? I'll put themes here as well. What influences? The Meno's actually got influences from some of those pre-Socratic philosophers we've already looked at. And if you are doing this at university, you'd also look at, okay, how is this dialogue being picked up by people later on? And then what about anything to do with the context? A lot of the stories you'll get don't really make sense unless you understand the context. How are the Greeks? What is these ancient Greeks' worldview, their practices, their way of understanding politics, the relation between the sexes, household, all that sort of thing? Because there's a lot of that in the background, and that's why often if you get like a puffin version of some of these, There's an introduction at the start by an editor. It'll tell you some of this stuff, or you can just look it up. And then there's also keywords. Sometimes there's keywords that are used, and it's important to know the original Greek. I'll just write a few of them here. And in translation, you won't necessarily see these. That's EEI, IDOS, which means idea. Agaton meaning good. All right. So I just wanted to give you a bit of a heads up how to go about reading these works. You want to have a broad view, and you want to go back and forth from the details to the broad view, back and forth. You want to make sense of all those details in terms of these main themes and structures, okay? And I've given you how it looks a little bit for the Meno. Did anyone find any cultural things they found unusual about how Greeks think and how they behave in this dialogue? Yes. Yes. There are a lot of assumptions about the role of men and women. The stories are more complicated than this, but you'll find in Aristotle also the idea that men are the ones who are designed to do the thinking, the logos, and women not so much. And the women are the ones who have the capacity to participate in public life, in politics. And then I have a theory, a hypothesis is that because of that, in this ancient society, which wasn't Christian, because the men thought only other men were their equals in terms of conversation and that intimacy at an intellectual level, you'll find there is a bit of homosexuality in there as well. You may have picked up little hints of that in the dialogue where, I don't know if he's talking about a sort of flirting or something. It's hard to put your finger on it because when we're looking at other cultures, it's hard to know what they're thinking and what they're saying, but from our perspective, it looks like there's flirtation or something like that. All right. We don't need to go into details with that, but it's good to know some of these things. That's probably enough for the context. All right. Any questions before I move on? Yeah, well, okay. That actually helps me move on to the next point because the dialogues, in Plato's mind, he's certainly got structures in his mind where he's going to take the text, but he doesn't present it like this is my thesis, here's the abstract, and how, like we would do an assignment today. He doesn't. It's a dialogue, so it's a gradual exploration, and some people find that frustrating, which is fine. And I'll talk about that now. In the early dialogues, the emphasis is on Plato not knowing, and that as soon as we start to inquire about things, we end up being baffled. We end up not knowing what the truth is, okay? That's what the emphasis is. And as we get towards the end of Plato's life, he becomes much more dogmatic. Okay, I'll repeat that. When you looked at Socrates with Father Ledenich, you would have seen that there's a lot of emphasis on him being wise because he knows that he doesn't know. And in the early dialogues, Plato is presenting Socrates in that way. So the emphasis is on reality is mysterious. People assume they know what virtue is, what wisdom is, what truth is, what excellence is. But when you start to ask them questions, they get tied up in knots. And that actually really frustrated a lot of people, and that's one of the reasons he got sent to jail. And what happened to him in the end? Yeah. Well, we had to take the hemlock. No. Okay. Yeah, and he had reasons for it. It was out of principle. Thanks. Where was I? I was talking about, yeah, not knowing and asking questions. And so he was what you call a gadfly. The people who would strut about saying we know everything. And especially the sophists who would go around. They would train up these boys to be good statesmen, good politicians. They'd give them the use of rhetoric and language so they could have more power and influence. The thing about these sophists is they didn't really have any consistent principles. They were sort of amoral. It was basically whatever works. So think of a politician today like a bad one who's happy to change his mind or her mind from day to day, doesn't really have any consistent principles, but will just say whatever will give them more influence. This is what the sophists would like. And they would also create these spurious arguments to say there's no objective morality, no objective truth. Um, and that's where we get the word sophistry from. You've heard the word sophistry? And what does that mean? Yeah, it's like that, but it's also
apologetics, defending by the soft.
Is a form of writing.
yeah, relativism. It's basically you can create arguments and very sophisticated intellectual speeches on things which make it seem as if something's true when it's false, or something seem to be false when it's true. So it's being deceptive or being skeptical. So it's the opposite of having commitment to truth. It's turning things upside down using arguments that are spurious. All right, and we all have experience of people doing that. Sophistry, sure. It's a funny word because Sophia actually means wisdom, but they're opposite. And so philosophia, what Socrates and Plato are saying is that philosophy, love of wisdom, is the opposite of sophistry. And there's all these encounters between Socrates and the sophists. And you might remember in the dialogue that there's a fellow called Gorgias, not spelt gorgeous, but Gorgias, and he's one of those he's become very successful and very rich by going around training these boys to be sophists. And in practical terms, they did become successful. All right, where was I? I was talking about the different phases. So we've got the early, middle, and the late dialogues. Socrates is one of the characters in the dialogues in all of them except one. And here we get into a bit of a controversial point, is that to what extent is the Socrates that's presented in these dialogues the real Socrates? And there's no need to go into all the debate about it. But the consensus is that, especially as we move towards middle and late dialogues, Socrates becomes more of his own invention in a dialogue that he's using. It becomes like a mouthpiece of Plato's views. That's right. Okay, and Socrates himself didn't write anything, so it's actually not straightforward to know what he himself believed. Okay, so early period, there's a lot of emphasis on Socrates himself, the dialogical form, and the not knowing. And a lot of it's about virtue. Virtue, not knowing. And you could say, when you hear the word practical from day to day, you're thinking, oh, going to Bunnings, watering the lawns. That's not what we mean here. Practical has anything to do with practice, and that means ethics. Okay, so this part is very focused on the practicalities, particularly ethics, which is how to pursuing happiness, how to have a fulfilled life, and under practicality we've also got the arts and craft. So making shoes, doing poetry. So that's what we mean by practical here. Okay. So early dialogues focuses on the figure of Socrates, talking about virtue, talking about the fact that we don't know, and practicality. As we move forward to middle and late, we're going to start becoming more theoretical. So Plato's own theories then start to get added into the mix. But Socrates himself becomes the way in which Plato is developing his own views. He's making Socrates expound those views. All right. So here we start to have epistemology. Who knows what that is? Study of knowledge. Yeah, that's right. So this is when we start to theorize about belief versus knowledge. How do we know what we know? The difference between knowing through our senses versus knowing through the intellect. Certainty versus uncertainty. What is a justified belief? All those questions, which are very important to all the dialogues going through. And then we've also got metaphysics, and what's that about? Pretty much. It's how the world is, yeah. What is the structure of reality? What is there? So some examples of metaphysical ideas. Sorry. Okay. Some examples of metaphysical claims are everything is made of atoms, or everything is one and multiplicity and change are illusions. We've come across those in the pre-Socratics. But Plato definitely has his own metaphysical views, and as we move towards the middle and late, these come in more and more and are developed into a bigger and bigger theory. And really, I would say the Republic, you would probably say that that's like the big masterpiece which has not most of his ideas, but it's just like the main work where if you had to choose one work, it would be that one. Or it has his metaphysics in it. Not just that, but that's included. And ethics. But ethics becomes more theoretically grounded. And you have to remember that ethics and politics are partly related. You'll find that in Aristotle as well. So we've got these three main areas of study: epistemology, metaphysics, and ethics, with its link with politics. When do we have our break, by the way? Okay. Does anyone want to ask a question while I just have a drink?
Republic in the late section.
Some of it was written early, but it's toward here. This? Well, the theme of unknowing and being unable to comprehend God, or being unable to comprehend the first principle or the good or the one, that's a very common theme, not just Plato. And Plato probably gets a lot of that from his visit to Egypt, which arguably he went to, because there's some mystical Eastern religious stuff that gets in there. Plato's saying is actually more influenced from Stoic doctrine, which comes later on. Okay. So the Meno is named after one of the characters called Meno, M-E-N-O. And it's sort of on the cusp of early and middle. When you look it up, that's what they say. I sort of jumped ahead a little bit because I was going to do some biography, but I'm going to touch on that now. A bit of biographical information about Plato. Does anybody have any facts that they could say about Plato? At the Academy. Aristotle set up the Lyceum, and Plato the Academy. It was basically the first college, university. Does anybody know what's the word academy mean? Why did it come? No, that's peripatetic. Yeah. No? No, well, that's what it's come to known. It's actually got a very much different meaning. It's there's a god called Academus. I can't remember what he's the god of. I'll have to look that up. But there was a grove of trees, like a holy place dedicated to Academus, and where Plato happened to set up this building and this center of study and training was in the same town, which was named after the grove in the town, Academus. That became so that's where the whole word comes from, just this grove. Okay. So Plato came from a wealthy and politically active family in Athens. Athens went back and forth between different political regimes. There's quite some upheavals at the time. There were wars. There were some oligarchs. Is that the right word? Yes. There was like a monarch. Actually, I don't know about the monarch, but there was definitely a period of democracy, period of oligarchy. That's what I was trying to say. Oligarchy, sorry. And there was a period where there were 30 tyrants, like a group of people that were not really acting justly in ruling the city. And as far as from what I've read, they were pretty mean and vicious. So Plato's, some of his uncles were related to that family. The word Plato wasn't actually his actual name. His name was Aristocles, but he was never known by that. The word Plato comes from, it means broad, from Platos. And there's debate about why broad, what's all that about. Some people have said it's to do with the fact he's got a broad overview of, he's got a broad view of reality with lots of ideas in them. Some people say it's just his forehead was broad. It's also been said that when he was doing wrestling, as the Greeks would do, he had a broad stature. Okay? A lot of these things we don't really know about because so far back in history. Ah, yes. I didn't write them down, but I had them looked up. I'll just look it up again. So 429 BC to 347. So his life overlapped with Socrates. So Socrates died. Plato obviously had a lot to do with him. Then he travelled, a place called Megara. Then he went to Italy and Sicily. Do you remember which of the pre-Socratics were in Italy and Sicily? They were the Pythagoreans. So he would have been influenced. Pythagoras, yeah, and his followers. Cyrene, maybe Egypt. And that sort of touch of mysticism and focus on the one. And there are mystical elements to Plato's thought, or quasi-religious. He does talk about having a genius, which is like a spirit that guides him towards the truth. And he talks about prophecy and other things like that. Some of that mysticism may come from that region. So then he returned, and armed with all this knowledge, he must have grown quite wise or broadened his ideas, and then he founded the academy. All right, in terms of influences, Socrates, obviously, that's the main one. Parmenides and Zeno. Parmenides has a real focus on unity, and that perfection is unity, or the highest principle is unity. Pythagoras, because Pythagoras really emphasized that reality is about intelligible essences and ratios, and Plato had a real focus on mathematical knowledge. Mathematical knowledge is far superior to mere opinion or experience, because when you're dealing with mathematical relations, they're certain and they're absolute and they're never changing. A bit of Heraclitus gets in there, because Heraclitus, if you recall, emphasized everything's always changing in the sensible physical realm. It's like he's taken Parmenides and he's taken Heraclitus and he's combined them. Heraclitus ideas apply to the physical realm down here. Parmenides and Pythagoras in the ideal realm up here. Okay, so just to give you a very can I rub this off now? Yeah, a very rough overview of Plato's overall view of reality. I'm going to miss a few of the details out, but this will do for now. This is the physical, sensual, sensible. You'll hear the word sensible in philosophy. It doesn't mean that you have common sense, or it doesn't mean that you're when your mum and dad say be sensible, it's not that. It's about to do with the senses. Changing. Opinion, meaning what seems to be the case. Not everything is as it seems in this realm. Opinion, seeming, things change. And you've got this line, division between the sensible world and then the spiritual or intellectual world. Here we've got the world of the ideas. And so in the world of ideas, we have these ideal forms. And Plato is, and it's all through his works, but he works them out in, for example, in the Republic. The ideas are these entities which are purely immaterial, spiritual, and perhaps at a first glance you think, well, that's crazy. There's no such thing as an idea just existing by itself. How did he come to that view? However, when you start to ask about the intelligible, rational aspects of reality, it's not actually difficult to come to this view. If you think about, let's just think about a mathematical relation. How do you construct a square or a triangle? Are there any rules for constructing a triangle? Yeah? Yeah. There's an essence of a triangle, okay? Now, is that essence going to be always the case all through history? Okay. All right. Let's just limit it to what geometry is flat plane geometry again? We'll just do Euclidean geometry, okay? We could easily think of another example where Einstein wouldn't threaten the view, but we'll just look at triangles. So if we're thinking of a two-dimensional plane, flat plane, to construct a triangle, we have to have three sides, and they have to be straight, and the angles are always going to add up to 180. All right. Now that's like a law, a rule. You can't change it. You can't say, I'm going to make a triangle, but I'm going to make it with two sides. You can't do it. So when you start to think about these ratios or relations, some of these relations are necessary. That it has to be that way. And in mathematics, for example, we study these necessary relations. There are other relations that could be different. So the fact that I'm standing here now, that's a contingent relation. It's not always the case. But when we're doing theoria, we're dealing with these necessary ideas, necessary connections, such as triangles are always this way. The whole is always greater than the part. Can anybody think? Actually, it might be good to do this. Are we going to have a break soon? Okay. Oh yeah. What I'll get you to do is the back row can go into threes, but everyone else can go into twos. Try and think of two or three statements which you think would be necessary and always the same. Like I've given you some examples. All triangles have got a total of 180 degrees. There's a lot of these in mathematics. But try and think of them in ethics as well. Like it's always wrong to, or you could say, if A is greater than B and B is greater than C, then A is greater than C. That's a necessary relation. Right? So you can think of two or three of those.
Of there being those laws, the situation we're thinking of.
No, you don't have to. You don't have to think of a concrete example. Just think of the general idea.
Yeah, but are we looking for the general ideas that follow the law may not stay the same?
The ones that stay the same.
The ones that stay the same.
Yeah.
For me. ethics point of view.
Doesn't have to be ethics. It could be anything, but ethics is one example. Yeah. Can you think of anything, Murray? Yeah.
The definition.
If we have a break together, can we do it? If we have a break at the same time?
I've got when she won the recording.
Did you pause the recording? Oh, I see. Hello, everyone who's watching. Just one person, is it okay? I think. Yeah. Is this the first time you've had? They only do it once a month. Okay. Anybody want to volunteer what they got up? Yes? Great. Yep. Yep. That one's a hard one. Because something can be always true. This is quite a subtle, difficult point. Something could be always true because that's how God's made it. But maybe God could have done it otherwise. So I'm not going to say that's wrong. I'm just saying you got to have to think about that one more. But it's definitely an absolute in our reality. Yes.
Adam, made from the Adam ground.
Yeah, his life didn't begin at conception.
Did Adam have a belly button?
Yeah.
Ours was not, life is not self-generative.
Yeah, that's good. And I think what you mean is finite life.
Yes.
Because divine life was there always, independently. Yeah, I think what you mean is nothing that we see around us, especially nothing living, could have brought itself into existence and doesn't explain itself. That's a good one. Yep.
Square has 4 sides.
Yep.
Circle has.
Very good. Yeah. Gold mine there. All right, so we've got the idea. There's some that are more difficult to come up with. In a book I read by von Hildebrand, he lists some, and one of them is an act that has a moral aspect to it is a personal act. Mere animals or plants can't do actions that have a moral character. So if it's virtuous or non-virtuous or moral, immoral, there must be a person there. And then he says that acts that are personal have to be intelligent. They involve an intellect and our response to the truth or our value to respond to the truth. Okay, so there's another necessary relation. Okay, why am I talking about that? Well, when you start to investigate and think about these necessary relations, you think, well, there must be some other realm where these necessary relations are grounded. And Plato is saying that they come from this realm of the ideas. So there is an ideal circle. That's not an ideal circle. It's not even joining. All right, pretend that's an ideal circle. And there's an ideal triangle. This is like the idea of a circle as such. Not a small circle, not a large circle, not a green circle, not a red circle, and there's no faults with it. And there's that with a triangle, there's there's a perfect man, idea of a man. There's a perfect political constitution. There's a perfect chair, a perfect act of justice. There's the idea of justice. So all these sort of purified ideas where you just get what's essential. You get no flaws, you get no change, and there's no accidents either. By accidents, I mean this. If we were to come across something circular in reality, it would not be a pure circle. One, it would have flaws. Even if it looked perfect, you'd zoom in and you'd find that there's little bumps, right? But also there'd be other accidents. Accidents meaning other properties that aren't necessary. So the circular thing could be this small, this large, or could be this large, or could be a particular color. Now, all those aren't essential to the circle as such. All right. So what Plato's doing is saying, well, there must be some metaphysical ground, some foundation for all these necessary realities. How is it that things that we find in the world around us, the material world, individual plants, individual trees, individual dogs, individual persons, circular things, tables, all these things, none of them are perfect paradigms, perfect examples, but they all have something about them which reflects these. Does that make sense so far? What he's saying is that in the world around us, we see things with properties, things have forms, and we can make sense of them, because when we understand things, we need to think about their intelligible features. Is it circular? Is it human? Is it triangular? And what he's saying is that we're analyzing things in terms of these ideas. We must have some intellectual access to this realm of ideas. And we're recognizing in concrete things around us these ideas. So it's like a combination of seeing these forms and recognizing them in the world around us, seeing them reflected in the world around us. Any questions on that? Definitely, yeah. What did you do with Socrates? Did you do this symposium or the apology? Okay. All right. So the good thing to do when you're reading about philosophers and they seem to be saying some really strange things and you're thinking, well, how did he come to that view? Is you have to try and come around to, well, how did he get there? Can we think of a perspective from which that makes sense? And that's what I'm trying to do with you here. It's like, we notice there are these patterns, these necessary relations and patterns by which things are structured. We can start to think, well, how is that? Why is that the case? And one solution is to say, well, there is this ideal realm. And then Plato puts above the ideas the good. And that's like the highest principle. To agaton. The word agaton, it's a little bit ambiguous between good and beautiful. So you have this sort of pyramid structure, not a pyramid scheme, but a pyramid structure where you've got the good is like at the peak of a reality, and the good is the supreme principle. And he likens it to the sun. It's like the source of all light. And that light radiates all these different ideas, which I talked about here. The good sort of illuminates these ideas and gives them their intelligibility, their reality. And then all the individual things in the world around us participate in the ideas. But there's this relation between things here and the ideas. and then a relation between the ideas and the good. And the word, that's one of the words that really captures Plato's take on reality, is metaphysics, methexis, or metexis. Some people put the th in, and that means participation. Sorry, participation. So the way we use the word good now is more Aristotelian. This is the good with the capital G. Don't one of those words. It's not easy to translate because we have our own meanings that we already use. When Aristotle gets hold of the word good, for him it means it's doing what it's supposed to do, or it's being what it was designed to be. So a good chair is one that acts like a chair and looks like a chair. It's like you've got an image of what it should be, and it's fulfilling that. But here it means it's like an abundant, generous source of being and reality. And those two different concepts of goodness, you get them combined in Christian theology. It's very easy to take this and Christianize it, and that's what this is. This God, yeah, but not how we understand it. Yeah, it's basically having the same function as God. It's the pinnacle of all reality. I don't think, but he wouldn't say it was a person. Yeah. You mean the act of creation? Yep.
Everything that is that we
Oh, that we make or that God's made? Sorry. Yeah. Yep, definitely. Exactly. And yeah, definitely. When you think about the work of whether you're a mathematician trying to come up with new equations that describe reality, that's physics, or you're an artist or someone who's writing a book that they want it to be true, even if it's fiction, they want it to be true. I think it makes perfect sense to say that there's an ideal realm in some way or another, and that they're drawing on it. And composers talk about that all the time. They say, when I wrote this work, I didn't create it. It was already there. Yeah. So that, yeah, definitely. I mean, it doesn't contradict what he says. He has a story about, he has this idea of a demiurge. Demiurge is like his idea of a god. It would be heretical for a Christian to say that's what God is, but it's sort of halfway there. The demiurge, this is in the Timaeus. The demiurge just means some sort of universal agent. There's this matter that already exists, and there's the forms, the ideas. So you start off, in this story, you start off with this God, in inverted commas, and it's not creation ex nihilo because there's already something else there. Matter's already there, the idea's already there. It's like he's dependent. So that's why we would say it's heretical, but it's getting there. He looks at it looks at the ideas and makes them come into physical reality. Yeah. Yeah. It's like he takes the idea of I don't know, a potter or somebody making things, but they have supreme power and they do it. So you're definitely on the right track there. Do we have a break?